Animals, plants, microbes live in a world that's constantly changing. It can be as simple as a drop of water where the temperature is going up if you happen to be a one-celled paramecium or an amoeba. It can be an entire ecosystem, and what we're experiencing now is climate change over the long term. And a tremendous amount of study is going on as to how animals adapt to these kinds of things. Homeostasis are built-in mechanisms that allow organisms to regulate their internal environment within certain ranges. There are different kinds of animals that will regulate very narrowly things like potassium and sodium and chloride inside of their bodies, and other kinds of animals, such as certain kinds of fish, that will allow it to vary pretty widely. There are some organisms that will maintain their internal environment very, very different from the external environment. And there are other animals that will be able to live just quite comfortably by keeping their insides pretty much similar to what's on the outside. So homeostasis as a concept is the ability of an organism to regulate something about its internal composition to some degree. You encounter homeostasis every day in your life. You're regulating your own body temperature, all right, as an example. You're not familiar with it, but your kidneys are very carefully regulating the amount of chloride and sodium in your blood. And when those things go out of kilter, what results is various kinds of disease. The concept is probably most easily understood just by what you do in your house. When you're trying to regulate the temperature of your house, a thermostat is really designed to homeostatically regulate the temperature of your house at the temperature you want it to be at. And so what it's able to do is to recognize when the temperature falls below what you've set, particularly in the winter, and to turn on mechanisms to bring it back to where you had set it, which is, in scientific terms, is called the set point. Homeostasis has a lot to do with a concept called feedback. And there are two basic kinds of feedback called positive feedback and negative feedback. So in positive feedback, what happens is that if something deviates from what the desired level is, that causes greater and greater and greater deviation away from that original set point. An example of positive feedback in an organism would be the case of labor. As labor approaches, the brain has mechanisms that produces a hormone called oxytocin, which causes the uterus to contract, pushes the baby forward. There are receptors in the cervix of the uterus at the base that send signals back to the base that it's being stretched as the baby's head is moving there, which causes more oxytocin to be released, and therefore greater contraction until the baby is expelled. In negative feedback, what happens is that the system detects a deviation in some direction from the desired level or that set point, and what it does is that it works to bring the system back so that it's at that level of the set points. So for example, in the pancreas, the beta cells detect levels of blood glucose, and when there are surges in blood glucose after you've just eaten a meal, or if you've been fasting for a long time and blood glucose levels go down, there are a whole series of chemical, nervous, and hormonal reactions after that change is detected that attempt to bring the blood glucose level either up if it's too low, if you're hypoglycemic, or to bring it down if you're hyperglycemic, and therefore to keep blood glucose within a very, very narrow range. Right, when we think about homeostasis, in other words, maintaining things within a narrow limit, there are a couple of things that an organism can do. It can respond to a change that's already happened and bring the system back after that change has occurred, or that's called negative feedback, or it can anticipate that a change is likely to occur and begin to take steps to alleviate or mitigate the problem before it actually happens. And a perfect example is the regulation of body temperature in mammals as an example of what's called negative feed forward. It brings the system back to where it was, but it anticipates. It's a forward-looking system rather than a responsive system, a feedback system. Homeostasis is really an important concept to understand. It can happen through interactions of the nervous system, the hormonal system, within cells, across different organ systems. There are so many different levels of homeostasis that are going on in different kinds of organisms depending upon the thing that's being regulated.